If there was one thing the early noughties had in an abundance, especially within the horror genre, it was remakes. We were graced with reboots, or reimaginings, whatever you want to call them, of the likes of Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, The Hills Have Eyes, the Amityville Horror, House of Wax, Rob Zombie's Halloween remake from 2007, and The Ring. However, despite the decent quality of those examples, well, most of them, one thing that stands out in the film we're focusing on today, The Grudge, is the fact that the original's director, Takashi Shimizu, chose to also take on the remake. In 2002, the aforementioned The Ring, a remake of Hideo Nakata's 1998 movie Ringu, proved such a success that it set off a chain reaction of J-horror remakes in the American and other prominent English-speaking international markets. Director Gore Verbinski may have started the craze with The Ring, but the J-horror phenomenon also gave birth to another hugely popular franchise in The Grudge, which starred Buffy the Vampire Slayer incarnate Sarah Michelle Gellar at the peak of her fame. So, try to control that infectious rage as we take a deep dive into the jaw-dropping J-horror remake, The Grudge, in this episode of What the F*** happened to this horror movie. Juan, The Grudge from 2002 is considered to be one of the most classic and scariest horror movies to come out of Japan in the early 2000s. Many horror fans regard the film as the first in the franchise, but it's actually the third, with the first two, imaginatively titled Ju-on the Curse and Ju-on the Curse 2 respectively, being straight-to-home video releases in the year 2000. Directed by Takashi Shimizu, the movie may not be quite as thematically rich as Ringu, or even Nakata's Dark Water, a chilling and disturbing tale of childhood abandonment. However, its images are permanently embedded in the consciousness of horror fans the world over. The movie introduced audiences to a house full of vengeful ghosts, who are led by the family's fairly creepy matriarch, who groans and contorts her body in a manner intended to scare the bejesus out of audiences. Although, to be fair, all she needs to improve her vengeful mood is a long shower and a decent haircut. The plot of the 2004 remake is largely very similar to Ju-on. However, the main difference is in the structure of the narrative. Shimizu's original screenplay is split over several segments and is told in a non-linear fashion. But in a move to likely appeal more to Western audiences, The Grudge's screenplay was adapted to be more streamlined, putting more emphasis on the key selling point for the movie's main demographic, Buffy herself, Sarah Michelle Gellar. The events of the movie follow Gellar's exchange student Karen Davis, who's sent to take care of an American family living in a house in Tokyo. Once there, she starts to notice some very odd behaviour from the elderly resident Emma, and after investigating some scratching noises from upstairs, she discovers a curse that will consume anybody who enters the house. The curse is born from someone dying in a powerful rage, and Karen soon finds herself becoming tormented by the curse as it starts to claim its victims. Alongside Buffy, we also get an eclectic cast of stars who also play a pivotal role in the movie's spooky, if somewhat underwhelming shenanigans. Jason Behr plays Doug, Karen's boyfriend. Grace Zabriskie is the elderly and lethargic Emma Williams. Her daughter Susan Williams is played by K.D. Strickland. William Mapother plays Matt Williams, and Clea Duvall is Jen, Matt's wife. Also joining the cast in a relatively small role is Bill Pullman, who plays Peter Kirk, the secret object of affection from the married Takako Fuji's Kayako Saiki. Peter commits suicide by jumping off the balcony of his apartment in a sequence that bears more relevance once the plot of the movie and the reasons behind the vengeful spirit's wrath become more clear. While the movie boasts a pretty memorable cast and is undoubtedly positioned as a star vehicle for vampire slayer Sarah Michelle Gellar, the talent behind the camera is also quite notable. As mentioned earlier, director Takashi Shimizu returns to helm the remake, and writer Steven Susko, also known for his work on Texas Chainsaw 3D, delivers a script that makes the narrative more linear than the Japanese original. You know, for the quote-unquote dumbed-down American and international markets. Horror legend Sam Raimi produced the film, alongside Xena Warrior Princess co-creator Robert Tappert and Takashige Ichize. The production team behind the camera all have notable credits, especially Sam Raimi. And you could probably forgive the more cynical horror fan for questioning why the movie needed to be remade in the first place. I mean, Ju-on the Grudge is certainly an effective horror movie, but it's not quite as effective as its forebearer Ringu, which had more international acclaim. Director Shimizu hasn't necessarily improved upon Ju-on the Grudge. However, That's not to say that we don't get a remake that's not without some fun sequences. And at least it doesn't just imitate its predecessor outright. It's a fairly decent movie if you're happy to sit through something that probably wouldn't spook most young fans of Stranger Things nowadays. But overall, it's too tame and bloodless for this particular horror fan. There's a nice sequence in which Susan's riding an elevator in her apartment block, and unknown to her but clear to the viewers, we see the creepy boy Toshio appear outside each set of elevator doors she passes, getting progressively closer on every floor. It's quite creepy, effective, imaginatively shot, and adds some much needed tension to the narrative. The subsequent moment in which we see Susan cowering under her bedsheet after being tormented by her pursuers is also a pretty decent way to visualise the death of the character, with a lump appearing beneath the sheets, revealed to be Kayako's face as they both disappear underneath it. The issue is that the jump scares we get littered throughout the movie aren't all that scary, just perhaps a little creepy at best. The terror also relies a little too heavily on those all too obvious horror cliches. We get the cat in a cupboard trope and screeching bursts of audio each time we're meant to be shit scared at something suddenly appearing. However, the movie more or less works overall as a paint-by-numbers horror, and while Sarah Michelle Gellar is trying to be less wooden than one of her Buffy stakes, at least it's more effective than her subsequent foray into the world of horror with 2005's awful The Return. The rest of the cast is suitably game, and despite his limited screen time, Bill Pullman is good value as the college professor who becomes the love interest of the fateful Kayako. However, unfortunately, it simply isn't scary enough or bloody enough to satiate the needs of this gore hound and probably others. And despite the inclusion of horror icons like Sam Raimi all over the marketing when it was released, it doesn't live up to anything in his own back catalogue. The movie opened at 3,348 screens in North America on October 22nd and grossed $39.1 million over its opening weekend. It dropped off, however, by 43% over the following weekend, but its haul of $21.8 million ensured it was the first horror movie to be at the top of the Halloween box office since 1999's House on Haunted Hill. The trailer for the movie was strong and quite effective, positioning the film as a terrifying star vehicle for Gellar. Its competition over the weekend and around the time of release wasn't great either, with only Alexander Payne's wine comedy Sideways and the oddly placed for an October release, DreamWorks' Surviving Christmas, released over the same weekend. Sony's release strategy therefore worked, as the only other movie knocking around at the time for a similar demographic was Team America World Police. Fuck yeah! Which had already dropped off by 46.4% from its first weekend. The Grudge ultimately grossed $110.4 million domestically and $187.3 million internationally, making it a massive hit for Sony Pictures, and a lucrative one at that, with the movie's production costs being a reported $10 million. It's also recognised as the second highest grossing horror remake of the last 40 years, behind its J-horror counterpart, The Ring. Critically, the movie was met with a mostly positive reaction, and if the review aggregator on Rotten Tomatoes means anything to you, it reports that 40% of 162 critics gave the film a positive review. Clearly, critics and audiences were scared by literally anything back in the early noughties. Roger Ebert gave the movie a withering 1 out of 4 stars, writing that, "I'm not sure how most of the scenes fit into the movie. I do, however, understand the underlying premise. There's a haunted house, and everyone who enters it will have unspeakable things happen to them." Empire magazine gave the movie a more positive review, awarding it 3 out of 5 stars, saying that, "The terror is upped without relying on too many cliches. We'll let the odd cat in a cupboard slide. And while the harsh, clinical look and lack of humour may not appeal to everyone, it keeps the dread simmering, with the cast in a permanent state of uncomprehending panic rather than screechy horror." However, for fans of J-horror and The Grudge in particular, just what exactly did the studio afford the release when it appeared on the various home entertainment formats at the time? Well, it appeared on VHS, DVD and also UMD on February the 1st, 2005 as a bog-standard version of the movie with only a limited amount of extra features. An unrated cut did appear on DVD a little later, with several scenes added that were originally cut for the MPAA at the time of its theatrical release. It also contained deleted scenes, commentaries, plus the Ju-on short films Katasumi and the amusingly titled 444444444, both by director Takashi Shimizu. A Blu-ray release arrived in 2009, but oddly, if you want to stream the movie, it's not available on any of the big streamers. At least not at the time of writing this retrospective. Ultimately then, The Grudge is one of those horror films that perform well on the back of some excellent marketing, decent star power, and the perfect positioning for the movie on the release calendar. However, for this writer, it's just not scary at all, and despite some effective scenes, it really is an incredibly tame horror flick. I doubt any kids who happen across their parents' copy of the movie will lose any sleep watching it. Or am I being too harsh? Let us know your opinion on the movie in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching our show. See you next time, Gorehounds.